for my presentation, I'm speaking about gifted kids and how their brains function differently so that they are more sensitive to sensory stimuli, which is something I'll go more in depth with. So chances are many of you know or are a gifted kid, especially since we are in the honors program at the University of Southern Mississippi. So there's a good chance that you have had some kind of interaction with that in your life. So the definition, the way that I'm defining gifted kids is children who were tested, or children who tested above average on an IQ or intelligence test and have been through special education programs. And those are pretty common down here, special education programs for giftedness. So basically, through my research, I have understood that gifted kids, first of all, their brains function differently than neurotypical kids. And by neurotypical, I mean people who think typically, or who think at an average intelligence. And there's nothing wrong with that. But those who are neurodivergent, which is one of the things that was outlined in one of my sources, was that gifted kids saw a divergency in their way of thinking, and their brains actually process things differently than average intelligence. But to really understand what I mean by sensory stimuli, what I'm trying to go for here is I have to understand what sensory is, what stimuli is. So basically, sensory stimuli is anything that you can touch, feel, hear, smell, taste, anything that relates to your five senses, and anything that you experience. And basically the problem is that gifted kids experience these things at a much more, they just experience it a lot differently than neurotypical or average intelligence people do, and sometimes it can be more volatile, or it's just a lot different. And so it can become something big, and big reactions can happen from it. So a big problem is that this is not a commonly talked about problem. It's not really been talked about. I had no idea about it until I did my own research, until I realized that some of the things that I was experiencing wasn't quite what other people were having or experiencing in their daily lives. And gifted kids, adults, and individuals everywhere are suffering in silence because they don't know that what they experience on a daily basis is not considered typical. So something that is really big in what I'm speaking about is sensory overload. So sensory overload is when sensory stimuli becomes too much, and it becomes overwhelming to the point of an emotional or physical response. So it's something like being in a room and there's just too many people and you feel trapped, or when something is just too loud and it makes you just feel panicked or feel like the world is closing in on you. There are other things. It doesn't have to be a lot of people. Sometimes it can be an over response or an under response to stimuli. So what one of my sources, Susan Ritchie, was talking about in her article was sensory defensiveness, which was a part of sensory modulation disorder, which means basically that we don't really have that much control over how we react to certain stimuli. And she mentioned that sometimes we can under-respond to stimuli when maybe we should be responding more to it in a typical manner, or we can over-respond to stimuli that isn't that big of a deal to other people, such as a child who might have a big problem with socks or shoes and not wanting to wear them and not having the proper communication to really tell their parents what the problem is. And another one of my sources, Mendaglio, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but that is how I'm going to guess. He mentioned that gifted students have a heightened awareness of self. And in having a heightened awareness of self, they also had a heightened awareness of stimuli and their environment, which means that they're kind of just more self-aware and more aware of everything that is going on around them, which makes it a lot harder for them to kind of regulate their emotions. And something that I found really interesting was that he found this comparable to autism, Tourette's, and Asperger's, which I thought was very interesting. And his solution that Mendaggio mentioned, and the solution that I think would work the best, is counseling, not only for the gifted children themselves, but for their parents, so that they can have that kind of communication with each other. And I know that things would be much easier if we could give them these coping mechanisms and this time to cope with what they're experiencing from an early on point, so that later on they wouldn't have as many problems with their environment and with stimuli and with different things. And they could have a lot more freedom of communication with their family and understanding. Thank you.